absolutely good. Wonderful, wonderful. So let's get started, folks. So let me get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time today to attend this webinar. This webinar is part of an ongoing series of webinars known as the From Code to Court series. The series started last year as a joint effort between NorCal and SoCal, and we cover topics of interest to the NorCal and SoCal officiating communities. Recordings from previous webinars are actually available on the USDA SoCal site, and you can Google it. If you just Google From Code to Court officiating webinars, it'll take you to that site, and you can watch some of the previous ones that were recorded. We hope that you'll take away at least one thing from today that you can use in your officiating duties. So hopefully that'll be the case for all of you. Okay, so before we get started, a few housekeeping things. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. So it will be made available. It will be posted on the SoCal site under the other webinars. So if at some point you want to direct other people to see it or you want to watch it yourself again, that's where you'll find it. During the webinar, your microphones are muted. So if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and we will get to them. So with that, let me start by introducing myself. I'm Vinod Herur, and I'll be kind of moderating the session today. I work for NorCal, and I'm responsible for officiating and sportsmanship here. Also, a quick shout out to my fellow official, Jack Nielsen, who is on the call. He's also at NorCal, and also some others who are not on the call. Ken Grassel, who you all know from Southern Cal, he's the officiating growth manager responsible for that area. And also from USDA NorCal and SoCal, Rebecca Bauer, Gayla Large, Maria Goldberg, Trevor Kroneman, and Summer Verhoeven for their support of this series. Okay, we have a very distinguished panel that we'll be hearing from them soon. But before I get into that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack now, and he'll give us a quick update on the Kahoot quiz. Now, if you didn't participate this time, we hope that you'll take the time to participate in this little fun activity the next time, and you might actually win something too. So, Jack, let me turn it over to you, and I'll advance the slide.
Awesome. Thank you, Vinod. And yeah, we definitely encourage everybody to participate in the Kahoot challenge. It's just a fun way to test your knowledge as well as potentially win a prize. The three winners today, we're going to be sending out a uniform. So I'll be emailing everybody those winners so that we can get those sizes and we'll get those mailed out to you. And then Vinod, if you want to go through to show all of the questions, here were the questions used for the Kahoot. I won't go through the answers right now just for the sake of time, but the ones I do want to touch on was how often does a safe sport need to be renewed? That is a yearly thing that we need to do. You will get an email when yours is up. So make sure just to stay on the lookout. Depending on what time of year you completed yours, last will determine obviously when you need to renew it. But keep an eye on that. And this is also a vision form year since it is an odd year. It's those happen every 2 years. So every odd year is the year that you need to update your vision form. So just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. And I know we have a long time to go until it's needed, but just to kind of start thinking about it so that when the time comes, you do have it complete would be great. And then a quick congratulations, shout out to our winners. As I said, we'll be sending you guys an email tomorrow to get your information, but shout out Nancy, you were the overall winner. And then also we had Paul and Christy get second and third, and then an honorable mention to Dave. You're almost there, but we will be doing these for every webinar, so please participate, and you could win a uniform. Back to you, Vinod.
All right, great. All right. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We're very fortunate to have Cheryl Bueno on the panel. It's not often that we hear directly from the physio themselves, so let's make full use of this opportunity. Cheryl is well known to the SoCal officiating community, and those of you who are doing Easter Bowl might run into her there. Cheryl completed her bachelor's in sports medicine athletic training from UConn. Go Huskies! While also serving as the student athletic trainer and manager for the men's basketball team. She went on to get a master's degree and served as a graduate assistant in the sports medicine program at Southern Connecticut State University. Cheryl actually travels around the world providing event medical coverage for the men's and women's pro tennis tour. And I won't say who runs the pro tennis tour, but you might know. And she also does uh, the USA volleyball men's and women's teams. So welcome, Cheryl.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Also joining the panel is Joan Wombaum. Now, Joan, many of you know, but you might not know this about her. Joan took her passion for soccer officiating and switched it to tennis. Her first experience with tennis officiating was when a fellow club member in San Jose asked for some help on the lines of a pro tournament. That experience was an eye-opener on what was right and what was wrong in the world of tennis officiating. Now in her 44th year of officiating, Joan is a gold badge chief umpire and continues to chair college matches and serves as the chief umpire of many tournaments, including the recently concluded BNP Paribas at Indian Wells. She has officiated in the chair or on the lines at all the Grand Slams. She is a longtime member of the USTA NorCal Officials Committee and is currently leading a project on standardizing ITA officiating in NorCal called the Anchi Project, in memory of Anchi Liu, one of NorCal's leading umpires who unexpectedly passed away last year. Welcome, Joan. And also joining the panel is someone who all the SoCal officials must be very familiar with, Terry Cohn. Terry is in her 20th year of officiating and is probably a familiar face to many of the NorCal officials as well, because she's done many events here. She has worked across all aspects of tennis as a chair umpire, linesperson, referee, and chief umpire, USTA, ITF, ITA, ATP, WTA, wheelchair tennis, as well as in the Special Olympics, the international events. If you were at Indian Wells or watched the matches, you probably saw Terry on the courts as an umpire assistant as well. So what I'd like to do now is to get started with a very quick overview of the medical timeout rules and procedures around medical timeouts as listed in Friend at Court. These are detailed in Table 13 of Friend at Court. So I will not be going over every detail because you have that reference. You can look it up. Keep in mind that these apply to UST events, but we'll also talk to the panel about medical timeouts in college tennis and medical timeouts at ITF events. Okay? So medical timeouts, when? So usually you get one in warm-up and one during the match for the same condition. And they can be taken immediately after request or at the end of the warm-up. And again, during the match, either immediately after request or after a qualified medical person or trainer evaluates and is ready to treat the condition. And it can also be taken at the next changeover. And this is one of the interesting differences between what ITF does and the USTA does. One other thing that needs to happen is, especially in a match that has no physio on site, the medical timeout will start after the referee or official arrives and explains the timeout provision. So basically how much time they have, if they need any supplies, that they're able to get it before they start the timing of the medical timeout. So let's look at the two different things. When qualified medical person is not available. So maximum amount of treatment time. So there's no medical professional available. So you just get the 3 minutes. The player just gets the 3 minutes, which includes time to determine whether the player is able to continue playing or not. So 3 minutes, that's it. There's nothing more. If there's no physio, there's no athletic trainer. There's no extra time for evaluation. And the maximum total time for any stoppage of play due to a medical timeout is 15 minutes, regardless of the number of conditions. And up to 2 conditions can be treated at the same time during one stoppage of play. All right. So in the case when there is no physio, when treatment begins and who may treat? So once we explain the provisions of the medical timeout, and supplies are brought to the court, treatment time begins. And as I mentioned, 3 minutes after that is when treatment ends, or sooner if it has been determined that the player has sufficiently been treated and can continue playing. All right. And in the case where there is no physio, the player may choose anybody that they select to come and treat them. So they could select their parent, they could select their another relative of theirs, or anybody else they're with, their coach maybe. The one thing to be aware of is that if they are being treated, that it needs to be monitored to make sure that there is no coaching going on while they're being treated. Okay. Now let's look at the case where there is a qualified medical person or trainer available. And in those cases, there is an evaluation time component, and then there's a treatment time component. So there's a reasonable amount of time, and it basically is balancing player safety and continuous play. And the evaluation actually can be off court if the physio decides that they need to do it off court because of where the injury could potentially be. And then the treatment time is 3 minutes. Once the physio has evaluated and decides that they can treat, it is a treatable condition and they can treat it, they get 3 minutes to treat it. Now, if this again, the treatment can be off court as well. And if it is off court because of whatever reason, then again, it's still 3 minutes. So and this is one of the questions that we'll ask the panel, but we have to ask, if it is off court, when does that 3 minutes start? Okay, so this will be a question for the panel in a bit. And the maximum total time, again, in the case whether a physio is available or not, it's 15 minutes. All right. Evaluation time begins when the physio arrives on the court and starts talking or touching the player. That's when you start your clock and the evaluation time begins. And the only reason you'd start your clock is to make sure that the whole thing doesn't take more than 15 minutes. Because the evaluation time, they really have reasonable time to evaluate the condition. And the treatment time begins as soon as the physio says that they've evaluated and they say they're ready to start treating. Right? So this is what happens. And then, as I mentioned before, 3 minutes or sooner if the physio tells you that the treatment is complete. And again, maximum total time, I think this is a bit of a repeat, but 15 minutes. All right. And the other thing to remember about medical timeouts is that treatment during changeovers, set breaks, or rest periods, the player can receive evaluation, treatment, or supplies for any treatable medical condition, as long as it's done during the changeover. In USTA tennis, it's limited to 2 changeovers. It can be done on 2 different changeovers. But again, when we talk about college, we can talk about some of the differences between what college tennis, ITA allows in college tennis versus the USTA part of it. Yeah. This is something that's written in the thing, that they should notify the official before using any supplies for treatment of a medical condition. And I'm not sure, we'll turn to Cheryl during the panel session and ask why they should notify the official and what could potentially be the reason before they use any supplies that they should notify the official. And as I mentioned, they can receive on-court evaluation or treatment no more than 2 times. Again, USTA specific, but ITA has a little variation on that. And a player may treat himself or herself or receive supplies an unlimited number of times. So if they did need ice on every changeover and they're going to ice their wrist or whatever, they could get that on every changeover and treat themselves. Okay. And the player may also treat his or her doubles partner. So that's the other thing that the player can do. All right, now before we get into the verbiage part of it, this is some of the questions that I will ask Joan as well. But very quickly, if there is a medical timeout, be sure to inform the opposing players and the crowd if you're in the chair. keep the announcements very brief and simple. And this is taken from our techniques and procedures manual. It says, ladies and gentlemen, the trainer physio has been called to the court. And then once the MTO is taken, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. So-and-so is taking a medical timeout. And to the players, you start your watch then, and to the players, you announce the countdown. So it's 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, treatment complete. And then wait until all the player, if they have to put on their shoes or socks or any other items of clothing, wait until that's done and then call time. Okay. So what I'd like to, one other thing is about bleeding timeouts. Bleeding timeouts, again, is a big bit of, is different how it's treated in different, USTA has a certain protocol in treating bleeding timeouts. ITF is different. ITA is similar to the USTA, so they use the same bleeding timeout protocols. So we'll ask the panel for some of the differences on those as well. So bleeding, when a player notifies to an official that or acknowledges that there is bleeding, that's when the treatment time begins. And there's a 15 minutes is allowed for the total bleeding timeout. And that includes the stopping of the bleeding and the cleaning up of the place of any blood that has spilled on the court. So if it happens, if they're treated and the bleeding is stopped in 3 minutes, then and the playing area has been cleaned up, it doesn't have to last quite that long. Whenever it's done, the bleeding timeout time is done. One other thing, contaminated items should be properly disposed, and this is probably something we can ask Cheryl as well about what exactly we should do in terms of that. And again, similar to the medical timeouts, one in warm-up and one in the match. And they can take an additional bleeding timeout if it's in a different part. So if they had a nosebleed in warm-up and then they get another nosebleed during the match, that's allowed. And then if they fall and scrape their elbow and are bleeding from their elbow, that's a different bleeding. So that would be allowed as well. And finally, if the bleeding is not stopped in 15 minutes, the player must retire. Now, so this is basically a very quick run through of what is in the USTA Friend at Court Table 13. Talks about all of this. So this is all available to you in the Friend at Court. So what I'd like to do now is to turn to the panel and start asking some questions and posing some scenarios to them. And I'd like to start with Cheryl. Cheryl, and the question I have is, why do we have medical timeouts in tennis? You also do volleyball. Do they also stop play and allow medical timeouts for a player there?
There's a huge difference between medical timeouts in tennis and with any other sport. I don't know if anybody else watches other sports, but for instance, rugby, they can actually run out on the field while they're still playing to take care of the injured athlete. So you just have to make sure you're protected. When it comes to volleyball, typically they'll stop play, and also understand volleyball is a team sport. So there's 6 people on the court versus 1 or 2 on a tennis court per side. So up to 4 if you're playing doubles. But there's 6 players on one side if you're participating in volleyball indoors, which is what I do. And usually if there's an injury, the player gets subbed out and the replacement goes in, and I'll tend to that injury until they're either ready to return or it's determined that they're done for the day or done for that event. With tennis, it's much different because it's a one-person sport. It's one-on-one, and the person determines whether they want treatment. Whereas in other sports, the coach determines it. The athletic trainer, if they see an injury, they can actually stop play to say, hey, so-and-so is injured. I'm going to take care of him. And my interesting tidbit was I had told earlier to the panel that My mentor is Bill Norris. So that name might be familiar. He's an OG physio, and he's the one who invented the medical timeout. And according to him, he invented the medical timeout because before the only time he could treat is on changeovers and set breaks. So he did this to allow himself more than 60 seconds, more than 90 seconds to allow a player treatment of an injury so they wouldn't have to be forced to retire.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I was not aware
Yeah.
of that. Okay.
Yeah.
I learned something already. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
just to stay with you, Cheryl, what are some of the common injuries that you see that are, they make a distinction between treatable injuries and non-treatable. So what are some of the common injuries that you see that are treatable? And conversely, what are some of the non-treatable injuries that would not
We all
qualify for a
know.
medical time?
Well, we all know the obvious that's non-treatable is cramps.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most obvious for the non-treatable. But with treatable, I would say it's seasonal because when it's clay season, you tend to get a lot of adductors from the sliding. Um, if they're playing in elevation or a more humid area, the balls tend to get heavy. So they tend to get a lot of shoulder injuries because they're pushing a heavier ball, shoulders and elbows. Generally, if some athletes are deconditioned, like they've just returned after a long break, you might have some low back injuries or maybe like an
Mm-hmm.
abdominal injury. And one of the most common chronic type of injuries, or uh, acutely chronic, where it's recurrent, is knee injuries because they're always landing on a serve, on overheads, planting with forehands, things like that, or pivoting and pushing off. So I would say, like I said, a lot of it is seasonal. Tend to get a lot of adductors once you start to transition into that clay season because a lot of people are sliding and they don't have that deceleration control and they just stretch the heck out of their adductors and they end up getting strains and pulls in that adductor.
Mm-hmm. So, Terry, Cheryl, one of the things you mentioned was that cramping is not uh, treatable. I know that's, well, they have certain protocols in ITF that differ from USTA, but in USTA tennis, they actually allow a medical timeout
Yes.
for cramping. So I don't know if what benefit the player gets, but they are allowed one medical time, or actually, yes, a medical timeout for cramping.
Yes, that's right. I forgot this is USTA. My mistake. USTA does allow treatments for cramps, but the reason for that is it's not necessarily an injury considered in the ITF. It's not considered an injury. It's more of a decondition. So you can receive treatment on changeovers, but you can't receive a medical timeout treatment for cramping.
Yes. All right. One other question. So, from your perspective, Shell, from being a physio, do you have any advice for officials on handling medical timeouts or things that they should be doing or shouldn't be doing?
I have a couple of scenarios. Sometimes they'll call me out to court. They don't know what the injury is, what the nature of the injury is, what the body part. So we come equipped with a huge med kit anyway when we come to the court, but it helps to know how to prepare, whether it's a tape job maybe, or if it's bleeding, what the body part is, because if it's someone who came in prior to the match, we probably already know a little history of why they're calling us out to court. So it's certainly helpful to know the nature of the injury. So if they say so and so, it's a left shoulder. Sometimes I've been called out for the wrong body part. They say left hip, and then the person tells me about their ankle. So it's helpful to get as much accurate information as possible. Another time I was doing the medical timeout and I've kind of conditioned my body to know when that 2-minute mark should be coming up. And I was thinking, wow, this person's really generous with that first 60 seconds. And then, so I had asked, how much time do I have left? And they said, oh, you have 1 minute remaining. So, it's helpful for them to also pay attention because we are basing our methodical treatment according to this 3-minute conditioned time that we have.
So what you're saying is really important for the official there to be counting down the time, the medical timeout, right? Yeah, which is an important part of it. Yeah. Yes. Very good. Yeah. Thank you, Shell. I'm going to turn to Terry now. And Terry, I think one of the questions I had, it actually came up, I think it was one of the submitted questions. It says, if the player asks for an MTO when he's down 1-5, so it's even number of games in the second set, and has already lost the first, and says he just needs to ingest a medicine and rest, how should this be handled? Let's assume that we're talking about a tournament where there is no physio, so there's not a physio available.
So those are always fun questions. I think my first question back would be, what is the age of the player? I think when we're dealing with juniors, we have to be very, very careful how we proceed. We may give a different answer to a junior player than an adult. We have the right to deny a medical if we think it's gamesmanship. That being said, if I had a junior player down a set and 1-5 and say, I need to take some medication and rest, I would say, I'll be happy to give you some time to take your medication, but I cannot give you time to rest. I was once working a junior tournament, non-sanctioned. It was the Maccabi Games, which is the Jewish games, and it was a junior player, and the tournament doctor was on staff. We didn't have a physio, we had a tournament doctor, and the player wasn't feeling well. It was a warm day, so it appeared to be a heat related illness, and the doctor said, oh, she needs to just go sit under a tree for about 30 minutes and rest, and then she can resume play. And I very politely said, no, I'm sorry, that's not how it works. A couple of things that weren't covered earlier, and I know everything, first of all, thank you for moderating this. And everything that's been covered tonight, you can find in either Friend at Court, your ITA rulebook, or the ITF duties and procedures. But it's communication just can't be stressed enough. You touched on let the player know how much time, let the opponent know how much time. Make sure your referee is involved. At the very beginning of the day, if you have a referee on site, you should be asking the referee, are you going to come out on medical timeouts? Sometimes the referee will say, I want to be on court for every medical. Sometimes they'll say, no, that's okay. You can go ahead and handle it. Let me know if you need me. The reason for that is there's no coaching allowed, even in situations where coaching might be allowed, such as, well, I'm not going to go there. I'll let Joan handle all that. But in junior tennis, a medical timeout is not a suspension of play. It's just a timeout. So player A is taking the medical. You need to keep an eye that player B doesn't go wandering off and is standing at the side of the fence talking to their mom or their dad or their coach or someone about the match, excuse me, while you're timing player A's medical. I think it's also helpful if you do have radios on site and you're calling in for the medical, you should, call the physio to court, court 7, play has stopped, or we're going to need you on the next changeover. It's 2-all, and a brief description of the injury. You should never say player down unless you're calling 911 next. Johnny trips and falls and is, sprawled on court. That's not player down. That's play has stopped. Is that correct, Cheryl?
Sorry, I muted myself. Correct, because that tells us that it's not an emergency, but we do need to make our way to court. Because if you say someone's down, then we collectively decide, do we kick in the emergency action plan?
Wow,
Does that answer your question? I think I gave you a lot
yeah,
more
no,
information than you were
absolutely, and
asking.
absolutely. I think, speaking for myself, I'm learning a lot of things here, so that this is awesome. Very good. Thank you, Terry.
There was
So
a question in the chat. Real quick, I'll read it. It's,
go
are the
ahead.
players allowed to ask their parents / coach for medical supplies like bandages if they choose to self-treat, or does that have to go through an official?
I would prefer it goes through an official. That way we all know it's on the up and up.
Great. Thank you, Terry. And I
And I think
had
it's
one.
also important that if they are bringing supplies to the court, there was a question
Mhm,
somewhere I saw earlier about ice.
mhm,
You would not start your medical, ice would be considered a supply. So
mhm.
you would not be starting your clock for the medical until all supplies, be it bandages, antibiotic cream, ice, anything like that.
Electrolytes.
Yeah, electrolytes has been brought to court.
So there was a question that came up. I don't have it here, but the question was, a player's needing a medical timeout. There is no physio. They want their mother to come and treat them, right? So the
Mhm.
mother comes on court and starts talking to the player, and then realizes that some supplies are needed. How do we handle a situation like that? Are we going to start the timing when she starts talking to the player, or should we wait until she talks to him and finds out what is the issue and whether there's any supplies needed,
That's a
and
really
then
good
get sent to
question. So remember, the total stoppage of play is 15 minutes,
them?
and you may be starting and stopping your clock within that 15 minutes a couple of times. You're going to start the clock when play is stopped. And then mom comes out to court, she starts talking and she determines I need an ace bandage that's out in the car. You're
Mhm.
still running your clock. She hasn't started the treatment yet.
Treatment. Okay.
The treatment is the 3-minute window. The remaining 12 minutes covers a variety of events, so to speak.
Mhm. Okay. So this was the other question. If how do we handle it if both players request MTOs at the same time? And just for hypothetical use, let's consider a scenario where there are no physios and where there's only one physio. And Terry, I'll ask you the question, but Cheryl, you can jump into after she's done.
You just take them in order.
Mhm. So if
Yeah.
there's no physio and they choose, my mother will treat me and my father will treat me, could you have them run simultaneously then? Yeah. Okay. And Cheryl, did you have anything to add to that?
Usually, they don't typically ask for it at the same time. One may ask, and then the other will say, "Oh, can I have one too?" So technically, the person who asks first will receive treatment first, followed by the second person who followed up with the request.
Agreed.
And
I don't
I'm
know
going
if
to
I've
ask an.
ever had two players ask at the same time, but I have had the physio comes out and starts treating player A, and player B says, "Well, while you're here,"
Mhm,
and then asks.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That sounds good. Um, I'm going to turn to Joan now and get some of her input on this. So, Joan, with your involvement in the Anchi product, can you tell us about medical timeouts in college tennis and how different they are and what you'd like to see in those?
Well, college tennis has different procedures. And so the first obligation is that the umpires involved need to know those rules clearly, and they also need to be able to communicate clearly. In college tennis, this is the first year, everyone has to forfeit a point if they choose to take a medical. It's very unfortunate, but that's because of gamesmanship involving medical timeouts. So the first step as an official, when the player requests, whether you're a rover or a chair umpire, when the player requests to see the trainer, you have to make sure they understand they have a choice. The first choice is they can see the trainer on an end change and there is no penalty, but they only have those 90 seconds maximum. If they need a longer time, then you have to make it clear to them that they will forfeit a point. And they may say, well, I'll wait until the end change, and they'll go out and try to play with whatever's bothering them so they don't have to forfeit the point. It's really up to the player, and often, I mean, the coach is always there. The coaches are, for the most part, always there to advise the player about how to approach this medical situation. The other important thing to keep in mind when you're officiating at ITA matches is the other player needs to know what's going on, exactly the same as USTA. You can't become, where this comes into play is when the player is injured and sits down at the back of a court because they've sprained their ankle or whatever. And so the other players on the other side of the court, you have to make sure to manage that medical timeout so both players and the trainer know how much time is left. They know exactly what's going on. And it's important to stand in a specific place and project your voice in a way, and to also check on the opponent to make sure that they are receiving the information, that they know what's going on. I had a couple of strange medical timeouts where I had to go on court and coach the umpire to speak up because the opponent was not hearing the countdown on the medical. After the other important thing is to have the verbiage down cold. It's written in the ITA rule books, it's written in the manual, and everyone needs to be able to explain what's happening in the same way so that there is no confusion. Are there any other questions that you can think of?
The one thing that I think should be emphasized with everybody is that the medical timeout timing, there's no evaluation and there's no treatment or no distinction between those two in college tennis as well.
That's right. This year we have a new medical timeout time, and it's 5 minutes, and it encompasses everything. So it's up to the trainer to use that 5 minutes as they choose. With verbal conversation with the player, they can treat more than one injury. They just have a time piece of 5 minutes to handle everything that they need to do. Now, I don't think it's been updated in the manual or anywhere where I've seen the verbiage, and people have asked me, what do I say? Well, it's logical that when the medical timeout begins, you say 5 minutes for medical timeout, and then you count it down 1 minute at a time. And then when you get to 1 minute, then you give 30 seconds. It's no different from when we had a 3 minute, you just add 2 more minutes to how we do it.
Now, again, Joan, I'm going to ask you another question. In USTA and some of the other governing body tennis, they do allow off-court treatment. Is that allowed at all in ITA tennis?
Well, it's sort of unusual for it to happen that way because we play on courts that are all in a row. And I haven't had that happen to me personally in all the years that I've been doing college tennis. But again, if it needs to be for whatever reason that the trainer decides that the player needs to go into a more private place, I suppose the venue would determine what would happen. What we've always done is if we need to cover somebody up, we use towels. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you have to kind of be flexible with the venue. Yes, Cheryl, do you have input on that?
Yeah, sometimes we take them off court because of the noise level. So if it's like a head injury, in order for us to get a clear evaluation of a concussion, it has to be as the low level of noise and visual and auditory stimulus as possible.
All right, thank you very much. I mean, concussion injuries in tennis are very rare, although we know James Blake had one happen in Rome years ago. It can happen in tennis, but it is rare. Again, officials are assigned based on their ability to use good judgment in situations. And obviously, we balance what's best for the player with continuing play and making sure that the opponent has the information that they need. If something like that happened, the chair umpire or the roving umpire would listen to the trainer. For sure, we would let you go off court to properly treat the player. I mean, it's in the player's best interest, and that's what we're committed to.
Mhm. No, Joan, just to follow up on this, if it's a match, a college tennis match that's being roved rather than being chaired, is there any difference in the procedures or the process that you mentioned? For instance, announcements. Are there any announcements that the roving umpire should make?
The roving umpire needs to supervise they'll be called from another court. So the trainer usually finds out right away if they see something going on. The coaches may wave, hopefully that we have enough rovers so that they could call on the walkie-talkie and call the trainer to the court. We usually, in those situations, don't have spectators to inform like you would if you had a standalone court or a court where there's a viewing. What the important thing is for the roving umpire to go over to where the player is, communicate with the trainer, and make sure the other player also knows what's going on and supervise the actual medical timeout. They may have other courts that they're responsible for. I had one official go to an adjacent court to tell the other rover that they were going to be involved in a medical timeout. That's not necessary at all. When you see the trainer on the court, you don't have to inform anybody. You need to get over there and be right there by the player as fast as you can.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Good advice to all of us who sometimes rove matches and have to deal with the medical timeouts as well. Yes. Okay.
There is a question in the chat. It says, if a player takes a medical timeout right after the second set, does he/she still get 3 or 10 minutes rest time before the third set?
Okay, this would be a junior tournament. Does Terry want to address that? Terry, did you hear the question, Terry?
I'm looking at the question. I've never had anything like that come up in 20 years. Joan, what do you think? I don't know why they'd want to burn their only medical for that injury.
Yeah, we're not. I don't think we're talking about
college. Yeah.
ITA. I mean, we can give rest periods if it's hot enough. I mean, it depends on your geography then. Where we are in California during the college season, I don't think we've ever had to extend for heat. March is pretty cool, although it could happen. I think I'm trying now. I haven't been a professional chair umpire for quite a while, but I think that they would need to call the trainer and take care of the medical before the heat rule went into effect. And then they would have the 10 minutes. I mean, you don't change the timing of set breaks, or you don't take away set breaks timing or any other break timing because they have a medical. The medical
I was going to say you could certainly take your changeover time and then take your medical on top of it.
Right. So I would think that if there's a break, like a heat rule break, that you would have the trainer come to. First of all, when we're talking professional tennis, heat rule, they can go off the court, but they cannot have treatment because it wouldn't be an authorized break. They would need to do it on the court with the trainer there. Or if the trainer said off court, they would do it. That's fine, but it needs to be separate from the authorized time break, whatever that is. 3 minutes for the juniors. I'm guessing. I am thinking what the ramifications would be.
I would think for
Yeah.
juniors, they could take their medical timeout first,
Right.
then actually, they would have their 3 minutes of coaching first and then take the medical. Treat it like you would a bathroom break.
Mm-hmm. That kind of makes
Yeah, I've
sense.
never been faced with that situation. I would sometimes, after that 10-minute break, they won't need the medical, because they've been rested after that 10-minute break. They'll cool down, they'll get the electrolytes, and sometimes they'll feel better after a 10-minute break, because if it's a heat rule, they're really just using that 10 minutes to recover. And
Right.
with that recovery, sometimes they probably won't want to have that medical timeout.
I mean,
That's what I'm.
so then the question becomes, are you taking a medical timeout or are you having a treatment at changeover? Because there are two very distinct differences.
Right.
Mhm. Because when do they ask for it? You know, do they say at the end of this set, can I get the physio? So it's a lot of it is timing of when they request it.
And a lot would depend on what the problem is, because there's a big
Mhm.
difference from having some heat issues or like a skinned knee. That would be a completely different thing. And especially if a player had broken the skin, you'd want to take care of it right away because you don't want them bleeding anyplace.
Mhm.
So I would not want them to go off the court with a skinned knee, that's for sure.
Mhm.
Mhm. Agree.
Okay, I'm going to ask Terry something. And Terry, this is based on you do ITF junior events. So there are quite a few in SoCal. Unfortunately, not that many in NorCal. We hardly have any here. So any differences you can talk about between the ITF junior events that you do in terms of medical versus the USTA one?
Sure. So I think it's really important for everyone on this call to know what you're working. It seems
Mhm.
really simple, but I've been literally at national tournaments and heard someone trying to apply an ITA or college medical timeout rule to USTA. So I go back and forth amongst, different types of tennis. And if I haven't worked something in a while, you can guarantee the couple of days leading up to that event, my nose is buried in the rule book. I'm re-reviewing everything and knowing, if it's USTA, it's this. If it's ITA, it's that. If it's ITF, it's something completely different. It would be so nice if everyone played by the same set of rules, but they don't. And so that's where we earn our pay.
Mhm.
So, as Vinod said, we have several ITF junior events in Southern California, and anyone is welcome to come apply and work. I'd be happy to have NorCal people joining us in SoCal. I know for planning purposes in November, there's typically a J30 in San Diego. I think last year they had 2 weeks of J30s, and they're always looking for qualified people to work them. In January, there's a J30 in Claremont, the first week of January. In February, there are 2 more weeks of, I think, J30 and 60s in San Diego. And this week they have a J300, which is a big ITF tournament. So a
Mhm.
couple of the key differences, and they can all be found in the ITF duties. I don't know if you guys can see this or not. I have a little binder, ITF duties and procedures for officials, starting on page 19. It talks about an acute medical condition versus a non-acute medical condition, and I'll throw that to Cheryl to explain the difference, if you don't mind, Cheryl.
Yeah. Acute is something that is occurs at the moment. The other is considered a chronic injury, whether it's a nagging injury, like I'll take the knee for instance. That tends to be a chronic nagging injury. Tennis elbow. Those are things that are chronic injuries to tennis players. So if you know the person has history of it, sometimes we try to give them the benefit of the doubt. If they tell you it used to be an issue before and it hasn't been bothering me, but just today it's, like the balls feel a little heavy. That's called a chronic acute. So that is treatable because it's an injury that they had in the past. They've gotten over it and now it's re-aggravated. So at that point, it's acute. But if it's something that they've been getting treatment on for the last 4 weeks, that's considered a chronic injury and non-treatable. I do know that there are physios who will treat it because they try to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they'll say, well, they were good for a couple of days. To point being, before when I said a chronic acute, where it hasn't flared up for a little bit, but now it's acute again. So there's a fine line between that. But if you know for a fact that they've been getting treatment, they've been getting cortisone shots, they've been getting, they have their physio at home that they've been constantly getting treatment on, a 3-minute medical timeout will not change this issue that they've been treating for 6 weeks prior. So that is considered a non-treatable chronic injury.
Great. I think one other difference is that bleeding timeouts are different in ITF, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't have
Yeah,
the 15
bleeding
minutes
timeouts, they have 5 minutes to stop the bleeding, whereas in USTA they have 15 minutes. And I think it's also very important to note in ITA, Joan, I'm not meaning to step in your box, but in ITA, a bleeding timeout, you do not assess a point. It is not a medical timeout. It's a bleeding timeout. It's treated completely differently.
And it does not count as their one allowable treatment either.
Yes.
I've heard some discussion amongst officials because of something that happened in NorCal where the player took off her shoe and she had a blister, and it was a bleeding blister, and I'm bleeding, and this official said, well, she should have gotten up to 15 minutes to treat this injury. Well, that is not the spirit of bleeding timeouts. Bleeding timeout really is basically to protect everyone that might be exposed to blood. So a bleeding blister where it's in her sock, that's a trainer problem, and the trainer will come and bandage it and take care of it. And it does not need an extension to 15 minutes to deal with this. The big problem with blood on the court is you were worried about exposing people to infectious organisms. And so you have to make sure there's not blood on the player's clothing or on the balls or the towels or anything that's on the court. And that's why the USTA is always given the 15 minutes. It's not for the player to request a bleeding timeout. It's really the trainer and the officials working together that decide what needs to be cleaned up on the court.
That's a great point. Actually, it brings me to a question that I had for Cheryl. If there is no physio and an official has to deal with a bleeding timeout and there is blood spilled on the court, what do you recommend that they do? I mean, what should this official be doing?
There should be, at the very least, some type of disinfectant that kills the proteins in the blood. If worse comes to worse and you have nothing, hydrogen peroxide kills the proteins in the blood. That's the reason why it fizzes, and that's what we use to remove blood from clothing and from any type of cloth, towels, and things like that. But like I said, there should be a disinfectant, whether it be a wipe or a spray, to remove it from the court itself, or like the benches and other things that that the players come in contact with. But when it comes to clothing and such, we use hydrogen peroxide to kill the proteins. And there's also a specific that we get like a stop bleeding package, which is a spray that kills the proteins and then packages everything. It's a self-packaged item that contains everything, but from the gloves to the spray to the wipe and then the packaging that you encompass everything in, so you can properly dispose it.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you.
Does
Yeah,
this-
I didn't know that.
Is a sanctioned event required to have, it's basically a hazmat package is what it is, correct?
Correct.
Are they required to have that available if you have a sanctioned event going on?
I don't
That's a
know
great-
that it's required. I don't think it's required unless there's medical staff on site. It's really just I guess the director of the facility. It's their responsibility to, I guess, to whatever their sanctioned rules are for the entire facility. Because I'm not sure. Most colleges travel with athletic trainers, so they'll know what to have.
Right.
But as far as what you say, like for the host, I'm not really sure. I don't want to make up any facts and say that they have to or they have not, but I believe it's just whatever the facility has. You know, like they have the basic first aid, and it's just that's the minimal.
I mean, a college competition, they're required to have a trainer there. So this is trainer territory. But I was wondering about USTA amateur events or junior events. And I guess if you're going to be the referee for an event like that, you should ask that question of the tournament director. What kind of supplies do we have? And, I don't think I've seen that in a list of referee duties, but that would be something good that should be added.
I absolutely agree with that, John. Yeah, I think better prepared than not. Yeah. All right, I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock as well. We're at about 7:30 right now. My time really passed by quickly. So what I'd like to do, I looked at the our techniques and procedures, and I found this very interesting thing over here, and I just wanted to put it up on the screen. And this is what it said. It said, aiding a player, no official, unless the official is a qualified medical person or athletic trainer, shall aid a player who is suffering from a medical condition. Then it says an official should manage a medical condition consistent with the USDA emergency care guidelines. Nonetheless, any official may provide supplies. So this was kind of an interesting thing that I found in there. And I said, that's very interesting. And then finally, it says that when no other person is available, it is appropriate for the official to manage care pursuant to the emergency care guideline. So that's what it says in our techniques and procedures manual for USDA.
Yes, I saw that also. And wondered how many of us have been exposed to the USDA emergency care guidelines. Sounds like something we should all be aware of and reading.
Yeah. So with that, I'd like to actually thank all of you. And I know there were questions on the chat, and I believe we've addressed most of them. Cheryl actually had a question in there as well. And is that you, Cheryl?
I don't know how that got there. I didn't.
Oh, that
I didn't ask it. I don't know how that got there.
Okay.
I don't know where that came from, but I saw that there was a question there, and I opened it up, and it said that it originated from my chat, and I have no idea how that got there.
Okay. just for everybody's information, it says there's been talk that an MTO cannot extend past 15 minutes total. What happens when it does? And then there's a scenario presented, but I don't think we're going to go into that right now. If we'll do some research and get back to you if the person identifies themselves who asked the question. So
Vinod, one final tidbit.
Please.
Since we're talking about time, when treatment is complete, we say treatment complete. We give them adequate time to put their shoe, their sock, their elbow brace, any equipment back in to adjustment. Then you call time. Once you call time, they have 30 seconds to resume play. And this is very important because it doesn't matter if it's USTA or ITA. If they have not resumed play within 30 seconds of you calling time, it is not a time violation. It is a code violation. And we need to be very clear on that.
Good point, Terry. Good point.
And that includes if they have treatment on the end change.
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
once they're being treated by the trainer, it's not an end change time. I mean, we're using the end change time, but it's a treatment, and they must play on time. Otherwise, they're risking a code violation.
Code violation. Joan, that brings up an interesting thing. What if they self-treat themselves on the changeover and then they are late to start playing? What is that? Would that be a time violation or a code
That's a really
violation?
good question. No, I mean, I yeah, that would be a chair umpire or roving official judgment question. The whole essence of time violations are that it's sort of unintentional. And so if they were treating them so like they were rubbing their leg because they had a cramp, and then they got up and they picked up a water bottle and they kind of fussed around and lost track of the time, I wouldn't consider that a code violation situation. But if you said time and they're still rubbing their thigh, and you would have to use some judgment on that. What do you think, Terry?
I think it would be a code violation, delay of game.
Yeah, if they're
They're
still rubbing
treating
and
themselves, they're in charge of themselves.
right.
It's
Yeah,
a code violation, delay of game. I
so it
would
would be a
give a
judgment
little
call on the part of
preventative
the official.
officiating and say 15 seconds. Call
Right.
time, they're still sitting there, 15 seconds in, 15 seconds, just very quietly under your breath. And
So that they can hear you, though.
so they can hear you. Yeah, you direct it to them. And, it's kind of like, you need to do something. And then if they're still not ready to play, then it's a code violation, delay of game.
Right.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So with that, I want to thank all of you so much for participating on this webinar. We really appreciate the time that you've spent in educating us. And like I said, for myself, I've learned several new things here. So I'm absolutely certain that everyone who attended probably has as well. So I just want to be very grateful to all of you for imparting your knowledge to the rest of us.
Especially like to thank Cheryl, because it's not very often that when we officials sit around and talk about these things, it's more about rules and verbiage and penalties and all of that. And your wisdom and information that you gave us is very much needed and very valuable. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. It's a pleasure
And
to be here.
I just wanted to end with a couple of things. The next one in this series will be on the 20th of May. So it's the third Tuesday of every other month. So it'll be the next one, and it'll be about a professional pathway for officials. So please save the date, and we will get back to you with more information on that one. All right. And finally, we do appreciate your feedback. We like your opinions so we can constantly improve things. So you can scan this, or you will get at the end of the webinar, there will be another opportunity to provide us with feedback. So we would really appreciate it if you could provide us with the feedback. And with that, I will say thank you once again to our panelists, and thank you to all the attendees, and good night.
Good night.
And we'll see you on the next one.
Good night.
Good
Thank you for
night.
having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.